and those that are watching us at siouxfalls.org. We'll start today's meeting with a staff report from our interim city clerk, Sue Roust.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 4 items I'd like to talk briefly about today. First of all, this week is the first time when you will see a listing of contracts, agreements, and amendments and change orders to contracts on your agenda. They will be under communications as part of the consent agenda, and I suspect we will see these every week. We already have a list of them for next week as well. It appears that the process is going smoothly as you begin implementing your new Ordinance 7511 requiring council notification and approval of agreements. So that is there. Secondly, we have Jamie Palmer of our office and Matt Schneibly have found a way to display a 5-minute timer, and we would like to have a demonstration of that just to show you what they came up with. We, after some discussion and a request that we look at ways that we could have a visible timer, we looked at some that were really obnoxious. They counted in hundreds of seconds, and it would make you dizzy very quickly. And since that didn't work, Jamie and Matt have come up with something that I would just like them to, like Jamie to display. This will show up on the screen there. It starts with public input, and then when a speaker approaches the podium and begins to talk, Jamie will start the timer, and it starts just by showing 5 minutes. And then after a minute, it counts down to 4, and then 3 and 2. And then there's a 30-second slide, and then at the very end, it comes to time is up, thank you, and with a small tone. And so if you are enforcing your 5-minute rule that's in ordinance, you don't have to be watching the clock every second, but people will have an idea. If you would want to have a longer time, we could either do it that way or perhaps a longer time. It isn't quite so crucial to be watching the seconds, but we thought this would work. The one thing is we do need to have a person down there to start it, and Jamie is doing the meeting tonight, so if there is public input that you wish to time, she'll just go down there, and then she'll just need a little bit to get back up here to read off the next agenda item. So are there any questions on that? Or
just a thank you.
Thank you to Jamie and Matt primarily,
yes,
for getting that ready for us. Okay, the third thing, just briefly an update on the election. It has been getting increasingly busy. Last week we were pretty steadily having about 200 absentee voters a day at the county auditor's office. Last Friday it jumped up to over 400. And today, Saturday, they had over 200. Today by 1 p.m. they had 300. So I think we may be in the territory of double our previous record. That is going to take some time to process all those absentee ballots. We will be starting on that at 2 p.m. down at the county tomorrow. All the equipment has been delivered out to the precincts, and I would say in particular we need to recognize Dave Bixler. He has done a yeoman's job. He coordinated it, worked with the Public Works staff that were doing this. For the first time ever, the city did all the delivering of its own supplies, and that really needed some coordination, and Dave has done a terrific job on that. He's just gotten back from out running around doing a few last-minute deliveries, and our full staff will be here at 6 a.m. tomorrow ready to deal with any final problems as we get the election started, but I anticipate a very smooth day. Let's see, the fourth thing I do just want to note for you, as you may have already seen the email from Chair Aguilar, Barb Johnson from our office has announced that she is retiring. She has been serving in the clerk's office for just a little over 5 years, and we are certainly going to miss her. She will be finishing up this month. So,
any questions for Mrs. Roust? Councilor?
Sue, I read with interest the contracts, and noticed that on the ones we get from the the ones we've been getting all the way along, have in there what the bids were. These have just the what the cost is, and I wonder if there's any way to get what the, maybe we're not able to get that. I was thinking that through, if there was a way to do that.
If I might, what all we're approving on the communications part of the consent agenda is the actual contract itself.
Right.
So it doesn't, the bids and that kind of thing don't fit in that, but we do get the bid tabs, and the bids are available.
We're in the contract, and then the bid will come through later. That's right.
The
I knew there
bid
was a
comes
thing I
through,
was-
the bid
Right.
tabs come through earlier. You've seen those in an email all along,
Okay.
correct?
I knew there was something I was missing, or not missing. I thought it through, and then it hit me again what I wasn't getting, and then, yeah, I understand now. Thank you.
Then I had a question about that, if I might.
Counselor?
I noticed that we do have change orders and adjustments on the agenda this time, and I should have gone back and read the ordinance that we just passed not that long ago, but I thought we weren't doing anything with change orders, and now Councilor Brown's not here today, but or this afternoon.
There are two separate sections of the ordinance. One refers to contracts and agreements, and another one specifically says that change orders and adjustments will also be reported to you.
Is it over and above a certain amount?
Oh, I don't have the ordinance in
I'll-
front of me. I
I'll-
apologize.
No, that's fine. Well, we can follow up with it later, but I thought that we had part of that, we had ironed that out, so we weren't dealing with change orders. But I think it may have been over a certain amount, because it's a pretty significant change order that's in there. I think it's 50,000 something, so it probably fits in the,
We can double check the ordinance
Okay.
as to what the limit is.
great, thank
Would you please? Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you. Counselor Rolfing, would you like to give us a report on the Land Use Committee meeting of Monday, October 31st?
I certainly would. We had a very interesting meeting. We first got reports from Steve Watson from the Governor's Office on Development, talking a little bit about how South Dakota works in promoting our state and our city as places to come and develop their businesses, develop people's businesses, along with Lynn Keller Forbes, some CCOG, on all different things that are happening around Sioux Falls, and they'll continue to bring us up to date on those kind of things that are happening, and we thank them for that. We also had a report on the ATV ordinance that will be brought to, we thank Councilor Jameson for bringing that to our forefront, I think, and we will be bringing that to the council for a vote. Then we also looked at the zoning district study group report, and that will be being brought forward also. Lastly, we talked about the local food, or I should say the urban agricultural non-ordinance, I guess would be a good way to put it, that we do not have. We have some ordinances on the books for cats and dogs and a few other stray animals, but it's been brought to our attention that we are lacking in some other areas. So after a number of people came forward to visit with us, we decided to name a task force made up of two from the council, two from the pro side, two from the opponent side, and one each from the zoning department, one from the health department, and one from animal control, which we're not sure exactly where those are going to fall yet, what the ordinance would fall under, if one or all of those. And so we'll get a little touch of all of it, and then hopefully we'll get this all cleared up sometime before July of next year, and we'll be reporting back on that. That's it.
Any questions for Counselor Rolfing? If not, thank you, Counselor. We'll now go on to City Council open discussion. Does anyone have Counselor Erpenbach?
couple of things, if I could. One, just a reminder that Friday is Veterans Day, and I'd invite folks to attend the Veterans Program at 10:30 at Lincoln High School. And I did do my RSVP today, and I know that almost all of us have RSVP'd, and some of us from council will actually be there. And so I just invite you to be sure that to let the chamber know if you're going to be there. They do give us prime seats for that, so I invite you to do that. Then my other report this afternoon is the Homeless Advisory Board met today, and our numbers are the same as they have been over the last couple of months. We're seeing everything up in terms of need and families needing food, families needing shelter, those kinds of things, and then giving is not where we would like it to be. But then the other thing that the Homeless Advisory Board did today was we toured the Project Safe Home today, and it looks like it's about half done to me, being the contractor that I'm not. But it was interesting, though, to walk through it and see the size of the rooms and walk with Carol Muller from County Human Services and just see how far that project is along. It's supposed to be done toward the end of the year. And some of our chronically homeless, those people who have been homeless for years and who have perhaps alcohol or mental illness issues, will be moving into that over a period of time beginning in January. And so it's an exciting thing. You'll remember that City Council contributed about $100,000 to that project, and it's going to be a huge benefit for the city. And so I was just excited to share. I can't wait to see it done. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any questions for Counselor Erpenbach? If not, Counselor Jamison.
I just wanted to alert the chair and the clerk's office and the rest of the counselors that I will not be here November 14th, and I hope that I'm not causing a quorum problem, but I wanted to give you as much notice as I could.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other business for council open discussion? If not, we'll go on with our presentations, and we'll start with internal audit reports by Rich Oxel, Lead Internal Auditor.
Good afternoon, City Council. You should have a hard copy of two reports in front of you. We'll start with the transfer report first. And these reports were discussed and approved by the audit committee at our last meeting. I'm not going to read every single audit recommendation, but certainly if there's questions at the end here, I'll be happy to answer those. We also have Karen Walden, the manager of transit here, and Deborah Gatkowski, the city's liaison to transit here to answer any questions you might have. As you can see from the report, the city has a contract with First Transit to manage the transit system. We own the buses and the facilities, but the employees of the transit company are not city employees. And the city pretty much provides all the pays the operating and capital expenses. There's money obviously from the general fund, and there's also federal grants, and there's a small amount of state grants, and then there's also a bit of advertising revenue that they get for their operations, and the details are in the report as to how much what sorts of revenue is from where.
Rich, I hate to interrupt you, but could you check to see if your mics are on?
Is that better? The red light came on, so.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll start with audit finding 1 on page 4. That has to do with an agreement that we have with Active Generations for paratransit services. The agreement that they have with the city is that that'll cost them $1, and normally the fare is either $2 or $4, depending upon ADA eligibility. Our point with this audit finding was that you as a city council by ordinance set the transit fares, so we thought it was inappropriate to have an agreement with a nonprofit that could modify a fare that was set by ordinance. So our agreement was that, or our recommendation was that we avoid the agreement, that we unless the city council would provide for that in ordinance, we didn't think it was appropriate to have a special rate set by agreement. And you can see the response there from First Transit and from the city. On top of page 5 there you see the City of Sioux Falls response that and they agreed with the audit finding there. So audit finding 2 on the same page, on page 5, we noted that the fixed route fares have not changed since 1995, and the paratransit fares have not changed since 1997. And the amount that's coming from the general fund as a contribution to the transit has been going up. And you can see that chart on page 7. You can see the trend line of the general fund contribution. And we stopped short in our recommendation of recommending that the fares be raised. We know that's a difficult decision. That's a city council decision. But we did recommend that there be at least a fare analysis, and then and when that is completed, that the results be presented to you so that you can make the decision on what you want to do with those fares. And we had agreement from the city on that. We did change the dates that we recommended that this be done to coincide with when they anticipate that this rate study would be completed. So sometime next year, you can expect to see something presented to you on the results of that fare analysis. That was recommendation number 2. And then the last one I'd like to discuss is towards the end of the report, on the opportunity for improvement on page 11. We have something they call the Pass It On bus fare program, where SAM, which is the Sioux Area Metro, provides approximately 40,000 free bus passes to certain social service agencies who then pass that on to their clients. That program is provided for an ordinance, and you can see back in last year, Ordinance 47-10 that set that up. What we'd like to see, though, is that we have some sort of agreement, a written agreement with the various social agencies, setting up a criteria for how many passes they would get. And then review that number annually so that doesn't get out of control. We just that seemed like a lot of free passes to be giving out, and it seems like we should have that in writing with the various agencies about how many they need, and then how many we will provide for them. So we had agreement with that, and you can see the first transit response and the City of Sioux Falls response. So if there's any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer that, or any of the recommendations that I didn't go over. We'd be happy to discuss that with you. So.
Any questions for Rich?
My question, I'm going back to page 4 on the active generations one. Since that was done by ordinance, is that going to require an action by council to rescind that ordinance?
Well, the ordinance just sets the fares in general, and this was a separate agreement which was executed by the mayor. That agreement did not go through the city council. Okay, so what we saw was an agreement that the city had executed that, in a sense, modified an ordinance which was set by city council. So that agreement did not appear before the city council.
Okay.
So we just thought that an ordinance would trump an agreement in our reasoning. So.
Other questions? Rich, you can go on with the second.
Okay, for the second report, you should also have the hard copy before you, and that is just what we're talking about. We have a number of these agreements where we hire a management company to manage a city asset. And this is the first report that we've done like this. And as time goes by and as your information needs change, we can change the format of the report. We intend to do this about twice a year, and if that were to change too, we can modify the frequency of this report. We're just trying to give you just a snapshot of some of the biggest agreements that we have. The Washington Pavilion, the Zoo, the Arena Orpheum, the Convention Center, Transit, which we just talked about, and the municipal golf courses. And we just tried to list starting on page 4, just kind of the bullet points about who the city liaison is, what the period of that agreement is, have the required reports been received, have the insurance requirements been met, and maybe a few notes about that. Just to give you in one report just a little bit of information about these important contracts that we have to manage city facilities. One thing I'd like to note is when we did that Convention Center audit a couple of years ago, we had an issue. I'm looking at page 6, the very last thing on page 6 there. Had to do with reimbursement of credit card fees owed to the city, and last week I did receive information about that. The Global Spectrum had agreed, they had gone back and looked at their detailed records, and they had come up with a figure that they agreed to pay back to the city, and that figure was approximately about $14,000, I believe. If I'm looking at $15,482 that they determined that they will pay back to the city. That was the credit card fees that the city had paid for their catering company, that we determined that that should have been absorbed by their company. So I just got that information last week. When I wrote the report, obviously, in September, I didn't have that information. It was still under negotiation. So just to let the council know about that. And then another issue was the golf course agreement. If you look on page 4, in the middle there, the Keene, Prairie Green, and Elmwood golf courses are managed by Dakota Golf Management. We just had a note that we hadn't done an RFP for golf course services, for management services since '98. I did talk to the city's representative, Don Kearney, and the contract is expiring next month in December. They have an option to extend 4 years, and the city attorney had looked at that agreement, and we have to, by agreement, extend them for another 4 years, because the only way that we could not do that is if we gave them notice of poor performance or that we were unhappy with their performance. There's no indication that we were unhappy with their performance, so we have to grant them the 4-year extension. We would recommend, though, that after that point that we do an RFP for golf course services, because it just been a long time since we'd done that with that. So that is pretty much it on that. You should expect another report probably middle of next year. We'll have more information. We'll update all the information on there, and then any changes in formatting we can address those too. But if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those about that report.
Questions for Rich? Councilor Erpenbach.
A couple things. Thanks, Rich. I always appreciate these reports. One is kind of between you and Chairperson Aguilar. I know that you have issues with that $40,000, and I wondered if you could give us a little more detail about the difference between the $40,000 in Rich's report and the $15,000 that he's reporting now. Can you give us explanation on that?
Do you want me to handle
Yeah.
The number that we came up with was based upon a certain time period. I think it was like a 7-month time period that they had been paying the credit card fee, and we kind of extrapolated, well, over, say, 36 months at this average per month, we would come up with $40,000. And we said, you know, you could do it two ways. Just agree on that figure if they thought that was reasonable, or they could go do the work, the detailed work, and they chose to do the detailed work, and they had a 42-page spreadsheet which they provided to the city where they went through every single receipt from day one until last year, until the time they hadn't been paying, and they came up with the $15,482. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it absolutely does. I knew that there were some details in there that were kind of
chose
getting lost.
Rather than taking an estimate, they chose to do the detailed work, and that's
probably smart on their part, so I appreciate that. Thank you, Rich. Then my other question has to do, and I don't think it's in this report, but I just need clarification again. There's been recommendations before from internal audit that the administration come up with. I think it would be an added staff person, but in terms of someone to oversee these contracts,
we would prefer that solution. What they've come up with so far is a matrix of saying who's responsible for what, which employee, which department for this particular requirement. That's better than what they had before. We'd still prefer if one person was, say, a contract monitor, and that was a major part of their duties. That's what we prefer to see, but so that's where it's at now, where it's still the way it was before, but there's been more effort to formalize it and put it on paper, who's supposed to do what and where and when, and then we do some monitoring every so often.
Okay.
But I think we're at the point where you could almost make that somebody's almost full-time job to do that.
Well, that's it, and you know, depending on what happens tomorrow, what kind of contracts are we going to be dealing with, you know, going forward? I just have always appreciated that recommendation from you, because I think that's an important oversight piece that we all need to be doing, and that's a great way to do it. So then I want to make sure that, in addition to the, because I've seen the matrix too, I must have sat in on the committee meeting or something.
Yeah, I think it was at the committee meeting.
Yeah,
they showed that. Yeah.
In addition to that sort of matrix where we're kind of following, and the administration is following it, you're going to continue to do this kind of report for us every couple times a year is what you're thinking?
About twice a year, I think, until you tell us otherwise. Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. I appreciate it. Thank you, Rich.
I think we'll probably see more and more of these kind of contracts as time goes by.
Exactly. Thank you.
Any other questions for Rich? If not, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We'll now go on to a report by Kevin Smith, Assistant Director of Planning, on Weed and Grass Control Program Summary.
Good afternoon. Kevin Smith with Planning and Building Services. I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes giving you a brief rundown on how the summer went for us and what we learned, and maybe also what we need to focus on next year, which isn't that far away. But first, I'd like to say this is the first year that Planning and Building Services was responsible for the Weed and Grass Control Program, and it was a learning experience, to say the least. And I'd also like to personally thank all of the staff of Planning and Building Services, because they did just a heck of a job managing the program, and it wasn't perfect, but it was darn close. So with that, I have one slide with numbers on it, just to keep this brief. And I guess the summary is business was good this past summer, that we exceeded last year's total of violations by about 100, and almost 500 more, 450 more than the year before. Certainly, the weather has a large part to play with that, but also I guess marketing does work, that we did have a lot of direct mailings that went out to the citizens, to rental owners, to our own employees, asking them when they're in the field and they see a violation to call the lawn hotline, and it worked. We had a vast number of people involved as our eyes on the street, so to speak. Not every complaint was a violation. I learned that too, that some people would like their neighbor's lawn to look like the 7th fairway at the Augusta National Golf Course, home of the Masters, but not everyone is going to comply to those standards. But we do have minimums that we expect people to meet. And for the most part, they did. And in 80% of the cases, roughly, when we did see a violation and contact the responsible party, they took care of it. So of those 1,300 violations, the vast majority, when they found out, took care of the problem. The rest of those probably got a visit from our mowing contractor. And you've all seen these pictures before. These are, I would say, the most egregious examples of overgrown lawns in the community. And I could go on and on and on and on and show you examples. Essentially the same thing. Property owners who are uncaring, they are apathetic, they are absent from the city of Sioux Falls, whatever you want to call them, they just don't get it. The neighbors get it, and that's who calls us. So we would take care of these, and you may next fall have some of those property owners in contesting the assessments. It's just too high. You charged me too much to mow my lawn. There's part of me that says we need to be fair in those costs, but there's also a part of me that says we don't want to be the lawn mowing contractor for the citizens of Sioux Falls. We would much rather prefer that property owners take care of their yards and we don't get involved. That enforcement is there if you choose not to follow the rules, not that you didn't know that grass grows in South Dakota. But what I really learned this summer was there are a lot of other issues out there. And if my young son was out selling Cub Scout popcorn and he was walking down this street, I'd say, keep walking, Landon, don't stop, because we're not going near that house. That looks scary. But this house, I could watch from across the street and say, sure, run up to that one, see who's home, see if we can sell him something. In this house, you might wonder, hey, what's behind all those bushes? Are they hiding something? Go figure. There was a sign in the front yard there. And in this example, while it's not as dramatic as the last two, there is something to be said for cleaning up the front yard. Now, interesting part, none of those were violations. More interesting, those properties were all right next to each other. Even more interesting, this is in the Avera, essentially the Avera-McKinnon neighborhood, where between Avera and Sioux Falls Specialty Hospital, they own most of the property south of their campus down to 26th Street. Our weed inspector, Mark Thompson, was out on a complaint call in this neighborhood, and he came back and said, wow, we have issues out there beyond weeds. What are we going to do? Russ Sorensen, one of our planners, contacted both groups. We met with them one time, and their only question was, what do we need to do and when do you need it done by? And they took their own initiative, both groups, and essentially transformed the entire neighborhood. They went far beyond what we would have required them to do by ordinance. And this is the key here is, as owners of the property, they went beyond what the minimum standards are. And I'd also like to thank those two groups for being a model for others to follow. And I'm sure there's people who are going to say, well, geez, that's Avera and that's Sioux Falls Specialty Hospital. They have more resources than anybody else. They could just go out and do it. Well, if you would go to the Cathedral neighborhood and ask Bev Oliver, they did the same thing, only they did it as a neighborhood event. They got the neighborhood together and said, let's clean up our alleyways. They didn't wait for the city to come in and issue citations. It was a priority for them. They took care of it. What a great thing. Do we need more of that in Sioux Falls? Yes, because if you're living in this house, and don't look for the weed violation, there isn't one there. This is just for comparative purposes. And this is your next door neighbor's house. I don't think it's unrealistic to think, geez, those need to be trimmed back. And the next photo I'm going to show you is a dramatic example of what happens afterwards. Now, this has not been photoshopped. That house I just showed you had gotten to such a state of disrepair where the foundation was caving into the basement, and it looked like a miniature version of Wind Cave in there. And our only solution was to demolish the house. And this is not a victory for anybody. That was a nice 1880s style house that now is a vacant lot, and we'll probably have to go and deal with the weeds there next summer. So what I learned on my summer job, and I was often asked, hey, why do we need a vegetation ordinance? What does it matter? Who cares? It's the progression. It's the progression of, if you don't care enough to mow the lawn, maybe you don't care enough to trim the trees, maybe you don't care enough to keep the garbage from piling in the backyard, and ultimately, maybe you don't care about the structure enough that it falls into a state of disrepair, and we have to come in. Thank goodness we have people like Mike Fiddler at the street department who can tear down a house and leave the fence intact, but that's not a victory. We put a lot of effort into that. A lot of staff resources go into enforcement. Our message is that neighborhoods can and should do more on their own. We come in sometimes as a last resort, but as I've seen in other instances, and this is a series of photographs from the 10th and Western neighborhood where they came out and celebrated something good. The neighborhood came out, and you'll see a photograph of Russ Sorensen, Officer Jim Larson, and Brad Ludens from engineering to celebrate the completion of the 10th Street reconstruction. There's no pitchforks. There's no people carrying torches because they're chasing city staff down the street. We're out together for something good. And we would like to be more of a resource for neighborhoods, that code enforcement isn't just there to hand out citations and do this to you if you don't do something else. We need to have additional enforcement, but it does begin at the neighborhood level, and it begins with neighborhoods taking care of their own properties and not having to wait until the city arrives. We'll get there eventually, but do you really want us to come in and have to demolish houses? And Lord knows how long the neighboring property owners had to look at that and to call you and to call us with complaints about, hey, can't somebody do something about it? Better to not let it get started in the first place. This is a neighborhood, 10th and Western, who's, I would say, taking control of their own destiny. We provide the resources when necessary, but you know, is a good indication when the neighborhood says, we'd like to come out and celebrate something, versus we're all going to band together and go down to City Hall and argue over, some other issue. So we learned a lot over the summer. We have a long way to go next year as well. We need to do more with that nuisance vegetation that goes beyond grass and weeds. That we do have foreclosed properties. We do have vacant properties that the trees overhanging the neighbor's property and growing into the fence do cause other problems that we do need to address. Alleys overgrown with shrubs and trees as well. More work needs to be done there. And we will be working with you in the very near future on some proposed ordinance amendments, and also just some policy discussions over what is enough. How far should we go? What should the neighborhoods expect from us, and what should they do themselves? So, in summary, it was a record year for violations. Most of those got handled with a single letter. We did have to mow some properties, and you'll see the assessments for those. But I also learned that when I'm asked, why do we need to have vegetation control? Who cares? That I have a good answer, and it's visual. It's not numbers. Drive by some of these houses and ask yourself, would I want to live next to this? Or worse yet, is the best we can do to just wait until they need to be demolished? That's not a solution to me. So we'll be working on it for next year, and you can count on us opening up again about April 1st. Thank you.
Any questions for Assistant Director Smith? Councilor Jameson.
Kevin, can you go back to that slide where you had the quantified numbers over the trend of the last few years? What I'm trying to figure out is how are you going to judge your success? Is it by this number, this 1,300, because it keeps going up year after year, or is there some other measurement that, for me, I got to tell you, for me, I haven't had any people call me complaining because they haven't seen any action from the city. So for me, the grade is great. But how do we do this year to year and determine whether you're successful or not?
Well, as I learned with snow removal and parking tickets, the weather has a great deal to play with that. I would measure our success in voluntary compliance. And by that I mean, I didn't show the number of properties that were mowed after a single contact from the city of Sioux Falls. Our measure of success is gaining voluntary compliance. So if we have 80% this year and 90% voluntary compliance, I'd say that's better.
Okay.
We did, as I said earlier, we made a mission out of marketing lawn and grass control. Now, can we keep that up next year? Probably. And if next September is wetter than this past September was, we'll be beyond that. But we don't measure success in violations. We measure success in compliance. And that's my, I guess, long answer to your short question.
Well, I was just trying to even help myself out so that when we review this, what should we be looking for? And for me, just I've gone through a few of these over the years where I've had neighbors complain about another neighbor, and then they complain about the city not enforcing the ordinances that we have, and I hadn't had that happen this year. So for me, I'm happy, and I guess going forward, I want to stay happy. And I think if we just know what those parameters are, and if it's compliance, that's great. But as well, I think you raised the awareness of these ordinances this summer to an extent that I don't think we've done in the past. And I think that's an education process that probably needs to continue on. So thank you anyway.
As a matter of fact, we're meeting with the Home Builders Association this December to talk to them about next spring and how to handle weeds and grasses on undeveloped lots, undeveloped properties. What are our expectations, and then how we can, I guess, peacefully coexist. If we never had to issue another citation and yet everyone kept their grass and weeds below 8 inches, it'd be a good day. But I don't know that we'll ever get there. But I know we will be diligent, and we do have expectations of property owners in Sioux Falls. And I'd say that goes far beyond weeds and grass.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, Kevin.
Thanks.
Is there any other business to come before the council? If not, the fiscal committee meeting will meet in 10 minutes, 5 minutes?
We probably have other guests coming, so we may need to wait. Robert, do you know our other county commissioners intending to come? Okay, well then we can probably start in 10 minutes at 4:50.
Okay. The fiscal committee meeting will start at 4:50, and the informational meeting is adjourned.